Pope Leo XIII, born in the early decades of the 21st century, emerged as a towering figure in the modern Catholic Church, but his papacy cannot be fully understood without tracing his deep intellectual and spiritual roots to the Augustinian tradition. His formative years were profoundly shaped by the teachings of St. Augustine of Hippo, whose synthesis of classical philosophy and Christian doctrine served as both compass and anchor throughout Leo's ecclesiastical career. The Augustinian background of Pope Leo XIV was not merely an academic interest, but a lived and embodied theological orientation that permeated his vision for the Church, his pastoral strategies, and his engagement with contemporary issues. Before he became Leo XIV, he was known to the world as Father Matteo Benassi, an Italian cleric from Emilia-Romagna. From his earliest seminary years, he demonstrated a fascination with the works of the Church Fathers, gravitating especially toward Augustine's Confessions and City of God. While many of his peers delved into more contemporary theologians, Benassi immersed himself in the Latin corpus, often quoting lengthy passages from Augustine in both his homilies and classroom lectures. His academic formation at the Pontifical Lateran University further nurtured this passion, as he chose to specialize in patristics with a doctoral dissertation on the theme of memory and divine grace in the Confessions. This was not merely an intellectual exercise. For Benassi, Augustine's introspective journey mirrored the struggles of modern man, torn between ambition and humility, noise and silence, sin and redemption. What set him apart was not just his erudition, but the existential gravity with which he approached Augustine's thought. For Benassi, Augustine was not a relic of the past, but a guide for confronting the dissonance of the present. He frequently emphasized the restlessness of the human heart, echoing the opening line of the Confessions. "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." This restlessness, he believed, had taken new forms in an age of digital saturation, consumerism, and ideological fragmentation. As a bishop and later cardinal, he sought to translate Augustine's insight into pastoral action, organizing retreats for young adults that focused not on moralism, but on the existential ache for meaning, a theme Augustine knew all too well. Benassi's homiletic style was unapologetically Augustinian. He preached with the cadence of a man wrestling with the eternal, often refusing to offer easy answers. Instead, he invited his listeners to dwell in the questions, trusting that grace would illuminate the path forward. His emphasis on grace was another hallmark of his Augustinianism. In an era where Pelagian tendencies re-emerged in the form of self-optimization, therapy culture, and hyper-individualism, Benassi reminded his flock that salvation is not earned, but received. This theological posture informed his critiques of both the secular world and the ecclesial structures that prioritized bureaucracy over the mystery of divine mercy. For Benassi, the Church was not a fortress, but a hospital, and every sacrament a manifestation of God's unmerited love. Upon his election as Pope Leo XIV, the first signs of his Augustinian framework became immediately apparent in his choice of papal motto, Veritas in Caritate, truth in charity. This phrase, while rooted in Pauline theology, was a favorite of Augustine, who tirelessly insisted that truth divorced from love was not only ineffective, but harmful. In his inaugural homily, Leo XIV drew from Augustine's pastoral letters to explain his vision for the papacy, a shepherd who guards the deposit of faith not through coercion, but by persuasion, not by condemnation, but by witness. He acknowledged the Church's wounds, scandals, divisions, loss of moral credibility, and insisted that healing would not come from programs but from a return to the heart, to what he called the Augustinian core of Christian existence. This return to the heart was not sentimental, but radical. Pope Leo XIII challenged the Church to re-examine its structures, not merely for efficiency, but for fidelity to the gospel. He launched a sweeping synodal process not unlike Augustine's own episcopal practice in Hippo, where decision-making was communal and theological discourse was vigorous. He encouraged bishops to rediscover the contemplative dimension of their office, urging them to sit at the feet of the Lord before standing at the altar. He reformed seminary training to include more rigorous engagement with classical texts, especially the Church Fathers, arguing that theological literacy was not a luxury, but a necessity in an increasingly post-Christian world. Leo XIII's Augustinianism also shaped his approach to social and political issues. He did not shy away from engaging the modern world, but insisted on doing so from a position of theological depth. In his encyclical De Civitate Veritatis, released in his second year as Pope, he addressed the growing tension between secular ideologies and Christian anthropology. Drawing heavily from Augustine's City of God, the document warned against the idolatry of the state and the cult of individual autonomy. Yet it also offered a hopeful vision of the Church as the sacrament of the heavenly city, a community, called to embody justice, mercy, and transcendence in the midst of temporal chaos. The encyclical was both a cultural critique and a pastoral invitation, reflecting Augustine's own dual citizenship in the earthly and heavenly realms. One of the most controversial yet profoundly Augustinian aspects of Leo's papacy was his insistence on confronting the Church's internal sins. He convened a global council on clerical accountability and transparency, during which he invoked Augustine's stark admission of his own failings as a model for ecclesial humility. In one of the most memorable speeches of his pontificate, he stood before the assembly of bishops and said, "If the bishop of Hippo could weep before his flock, so must we." That moment of vulnerability galvanized a reform movement within the Church that sought not just administrative change, but spiritual renewal. His Augustinian conviction that the Church is simul justa et peccatrix, simultaneously holy and sinful, gave him both the courage to confront darkness and the hope to believe in redemption. His intellectual life continued to be animated by Augustine even during his papacy. He held annual Augustine lectures at the Vatican, inviting scholars from various disciplines to dialogue on themes such as memory, time, desire, and community. These lectures were not mere academic exercises. They became platforms for renewing theological discourse in the Church. Leo XIII believed that Augustine's anthropology, rooted in desire and oriented toward God, offered the most robust alternative to the reductionism of contemporary thought. Whether dealing with artificial intelligence, bioethics, or climate change, he insisted that no human problem could be adequately addressed without acknowledging the Augustinian insight that the human being is a capax Dei, capable of God. Another hallmark of his Augustinianism was his attention to interiority. He often lamented the spiritual superficiality of contemporary piety, which he saw as overly sentimental and programmatic. Instead, he advocated for what he called the asceticism of attention, a life rooted in silence, self-examination, and receptivity to grace. He encouraged practices like Lectio Divina, the Liturgy of the Hours, and contemplative prayer, not as optional devotions, but as the lifeblood of Christian maturity. In one of his apostolic letters, he wrote, "Augustine teaches us that to find God we must descend into ourselves, but we are often so distracted that we do not even know where our own heart is." This call to recollection became a defining theme of his spiritual leadership. Even in his ecumenical efforts, Leo XIV's Augustinian roots were evident. He reached out to the Anglican Communion, Eastern Orthodox churches, and even Protestant communities by emphasizing shared theological heritage, particularly the legacy of Augustine. In dialogues with Lutheran leaders, he found common ground in Augustine's doctrine of grace, while with the Orthodox, he explored Augustine's Trinitarian theology. His approach was not naive, but rooted in the conviction that unity could only emerge from theological depth, not from surface-level consensus. He saw Augustine as a bridge figure, African, Roman, monastic, bishop, philosopher, and mystic, who could guide the fractured Christian world back toward communion. Perhaps the most poignant demonstration of his Augustinian heart came near the end of his life, when illness forced him into seclusion. In his final public address, delivered from the Apostolic Palace via video, he quoted the final lines of the Confessions, speaking of the longing for the eternal Sabbath, where we shall rest and we shall see, and we shall love, and we shall praise. Visibly weakened but spiritually luminous, Leo XIV appeared less a pontiff and more a pilgrim, echoing Augustine's own farewell to the world, a man stripped of pretense, awaiting the fullness of grace. He urged the Church not to fear decline or scandal, but to embrace its vulnerability as the condition for renewal. "It is only when the Church stops pretending to be strong," he said, "that she becomes truly powerful." In death, as in life, Leo XIV remained faithful to his Augustinian legacy. His funeral rites included readings from the Confessions, and his tomb bore the inscription Inquietum cor nostrum, "Our heart is restless." His papacy, though marked by controversy and resistance, left an indelible imprint on the spiritual consciousness of the Church. He was not a manager or strategist, but a pastor theologian who dared to believe that Augustine's ancient wisdom still had the power to heal a broken world. His Augustinianism was not a nostalgic return to the past, but a prophetic summons to the future, a future in which grace, truth, and love converge in the mystery of God.